Educational Communications and this station present Environmental Directions with Nancy Pearlman. On this series, we explore the effects of human influence on the Earth's ecosystems and discuss solutions to environmental problems which affect the quality of life on this planet. Environmental Directions gives you the kind of information you need to help you participate in decisions impacting your community, the nation, and the world. Now, here's your host, Nancy Pearlman.
Hello. For the next half hour, we're going to be talking about the environment, particularly in California, through poems. My first guest is Lucille Lange. She is author of 7 full-length poetry collections and 4 poetry chapbooks. Her latest collection is Birds of San Pancho and Other Poems of Place. She has also co-edited 2 anthologies, Fire and Rain, Ecopoetry of California, and Red Indian Road West, Native American Poetry from California. She has published 2 children's books and a memoir, Married at 14, A True Story. Her many honors include the Blue Light Poetry Prize, 2 Penn Oakland Josephine Miles Literary Awards, the Joseph Henry Jackson Award, and 11 Pushcart Prize nominations. She is also founder and publisher of Scarlet Tanager Books. Welcome. It's a pleasure to have you with us.
Thank you very much.
I would like to focus on the 149 poems from different poets that you have included in this anthology, Fire and Rain, Ecopoetry of California. You've covered so many different ecosystems of the state, from oceans and coastal redwoods to deserts, the Sierra Nevadas, even towns and hills and canyons. How did you decide which poems to use, and how did you decide which areas to break them down into?
Actually, there are 149 poets in the book, but there are over 250 poems because some of the poets have more than one poem in the anthology. We started out by inviting people that we knew who wrote eco-poetry to submit to the anthology, and in some cases I asked the poet for a specific poem of his or hers that I liked very much and thought would fit. Then, to make sure that we had the widest possible contributions to the book, I posted a call for submissions on several online listservs, and we got a tremendous response to this of over 1,200 poems to choose from. I have a background in biology as well as poetry, and I wanted to make sure that all of the major ecosystems of California were represented.
Sometimes the poets would talk about their love of the out-of-doors, of nature, and other times they addressed some of the critical problems that nature, wildlife is facing. Why don't we share some of these poems? You have one called The Hungry Calf by Elaine Miller Bond. It's talking about whale hunting, ocean pollution, the Great Pacific Garbage Patch.
Yes, The Hungry Calf. Excuses pluck another humpback from the sea, and so her calf wanders alone, cast to the docks, where he sees his mother's belly in every hull, and tries to suckle milk from wood, life from illusion. Pitching, splashing, plying the waves, boats are but hollow ghosts, and the humpback, the calf, the hungry little barnacle tears himself away, splintered, back out to sea, where once he swam in a loving, broad-finned shadow, where he will now come to practice the cool liquid breaths that dissolve the salts of surrender, and where the great leagues of his kind come winging back together in another long repeating song of forgiveness. So the question that poem raises of the whale calf trying to suckle from a boat, what happened to that whale's mother? It's a poignant poem. Fortunately, humpback whales are no longer hunted. They were hunted to near extinction by 1966, and at that time a moratorium was enacted on the hunting of humpback whales, and they've made a comeback. Yet this whale's mother was missing. As it turns out, there are two other factors that contribute to the deaths of not only whales, but also porpoises and dolphins. One of those factors is fishing. There are huge fishing nets that are now used that are miles wide, and 300,000 marine mammals every year die in those fishing nets. And another problem is plastic in the ocean. Because of plastic in the ocean, whales and dolphins and porpoises eat the plastic and sometimes get tangled up in it. In the cases of the porpoises and the dolphins, about 100,000 marine mammals are lost every year to plastic. So it's about 300,000 marine mammals lost every year to fishing nets, 100,000 every year to plastic.
Humans are certainly causing massive problems for our marine life, and we definitely need to change our behavior and our activities to be able to be sure that these animals survive. You have written a poem yourself that you included where you're talking about taking personal responsibility for the environment, but you focused on an area in the Bay Area, Point Reyes National Seashore. That's a beautiful location for preserving and protecting wildlife. Could you share that with us?
Okay, tracking. Point Reyes National Seashore. A gray fox leaves its mark. Twisted droppings on the trail. No silvery back or rusty flanks flash in lupin and coyote brush by the path, and no short barking yips ride ocean wind. In daylight, the gray fox hides in its den somewhere on the rocky declivity, but each four-toed imprint, capped with claws like candle wicks, says the gray fox walked here, where irises and ice plant give way to dune grass holding sand in place. Far out on mud flats, another sign, deep five-toed tracks in pairs, right rear foot, plantigrade by left front means none other than raccoon, out in the dark at low tide for the day's first shellfish and insect pickings. Triangular mark crossing raccoon track, say black-tailed jackrabbit after succulent grass on the island on the flats where I stop to eat and make plaster casts. Tennis shoe prints leading back to the dunes will be erased at high tide, and I'll take my trash back to civilization, leaving only these words to trace the fact that I walked here, I ate, I sang. In that poem, I am another animal leaving my footprints in the sand.
And as they say, when we go out hiking in the parks and wilderness, what we take in, we take out.
That's right. We take it back out.
Pollution is definitely something that we have to worry about, but we also have to worry about the threats to our wildlife, particularly the insects that we depend on for pollination, and bees are so critical. And you have a poem by Jennifer Sweeney about colony collapse disorder and the loss of species and habitat.
Okay, abandoning the hives. From barn rafters, antique hives hang queenless, paperwork's delicate as ash, scaffold and cell mended thick with wax. Wake up, the currents of bees have fled this hour of seed, dark imaginings in their wake, unsweet, feverless drone. Comb the hillside for sleepwalkers drowsy on some chemical spool, or beg the swarm box to dance. Everything depends on this refusal of happiness. No one knows what they know. A row of empty jars fills with sunlight. So those empty jars where somebody wanted to have honey are empty because the bees are gone. Colony collapse disorder was a major, major problem around 2006. No particular cause was pinpointed, but things like pesticides and fungicides were suspected, and problems with the bees' immune system. And so in using fewer of those fungicides and pesticides and giving the bees substances to boost their immune system in the commercial colonies, that situation has turned around a lot, thankfully. But the bees and other insects are important, and the many, many species are endangered. There are 500 species of endangered vertebrates, probably 1 million species in all right now that are in danger of extinction, including all of the insects and microorganisms. And all of these species are important to having a healthy planet Earth, which sustains all of us.
We certainly need to protect nature, and what we have to remember is sometimes nature controls us. Here in California, we have wildfires, sometimes started by lightning and volcanoes, but other times they're being precipitated by human activities and climate change. You have a poem by A.D. Miller that talks about wildfire.
Yes, his poem in particular talks about volcanic wildfire. His poem Apocalypse is My Garden, which starts with the epigraph, the breaking up, and down of things is about the eruption of Mount Lassen in California during World War I. And this is the poem. Sitting on a lava block, this rock, a reminder that other times meant other things, while farmers in Europe plowed their land that was not theirs to waste with ruin. Lassen erupted for 7 years. The mountain shook. The world shook. Europe stayed revolution by starting a war. What revolution had Earth planned? The mountains just needed to break out. Magma jetted through vents skyward. Plague of flowing stone and fire. Incinerated cedar and redwood. Tephra cone volcanoes. Flaming rocks and mushroom clouds. House-sized boulders tossed on Devil's Postpile, reshaping land, raising here, leveling there. Tahama, an acid factory burbling under our feet. Sulfur and nitrate explosions, smell of gray scent, rotten eggs, embedded in lava pockets, squirrel scat, staghorn lichen, seeds and dust, a rain, and something new will grow. That is about volcanic eruption. As you said, fires are also started in California by lightning, and all of that is natural. It's part of the natural ecosystems of California to have fire and then have regrowth, a rain, and something new will grow, as A.D. Miller says. But what's happening now in California is that the fires are just totally out of control because of human activity, including climate change, including moving into wild areas that are prone to wildfires and building our houses there, and also having reckless power companies that don't properly maintain their equipment.
The poems cover a variety of landscapes, ecosystems in California, but we are very famous here in this state for our redwoods and our sequoias. Can you share Rebecca Faust's poem?
Yes, the poem Seeds of the Giant Sequoia is a very important poem because it points out how California's species can be adapted to wildfires because fires are a normal part of our ecology. Seeds of the giant sequoia come cone-born, encased in diamond-hard coats. Something secreted encrypts them against climate and time, lets them wait out the cold ground, generations of winters for that lightning crack, thunderbolt, trunk split of fire to fissure them to life. Dull glitter of years layering down. But when the firestorm comes, the ground melts and boils like stew, swells each seed from germ to Cohen, seeks meaning from rain, memory from pain, how it feels to feel anything. So the seeds, the cones of the giant sequoia don't open until there's a wildfire, and that's when the forest can regrow.
I enjoyed just even the title of the poem by T.M. Lawson, Brentwood Coyotes. Brentwood is a neighborhood in West Los Angeles. Some wildlife has adapted to cities and towns. We need to share our space with them.
Yes, this is Brentwood Coyotes. I've seen him myself up along Montana Boulevard on the sidewalk where you collect your mail in your sweatpants, where you jog in place at night, fingers to your neck, to check your pulse. Imagine him running alongside you, grinning. But no one will believe me. They think I've seen a ghost. No coyotes come down here. Is that why you've built your houses on hills? He trotted like he owned the world, scared of what it could do, tongue out, mazed by the cement and the asphalt. The glass hedges, a prismatic trap, a trick to a wolf's eyes. Wolf not yet dog, dog not yet wolf. Scavenger who delights in the wearies of surprise. But no one will believe me. They think he doesn't exist. They need to see danger before their eyes to believe its teeth. The mountain lives so close to us, visits us with eagle and owl, with snake and rabbit. Why not coyote tonight in your garden?
The collection of poems from a variety of poets, different styles, is really wonderful. I thoroughly enjoyed reading Fire and Rain, Ecopoetry of California, getting a sense of different landscapes, different animals, plants. I want to thank you so very much for putting this anthology together. Thank you for being my guest.
Thank you, too. I've greatly enjoyed talking with you and reading these poems.
I have been speaking with Lucille Lange, who is a poet, and she is also founder and publisher of Scarlet Tanager Books. We'll be back in a moment with more ecological concerns and poems.
Environmental Directions with Nancy Pearlman continues with further discussion of the world's critical ecological issues. For more information, you may call 310-559-9160 or go to www.ecoprojects.org. Now, here's Nancy.
With me is Professor Ruth Nolan. She is co-editor of the book Fire and Rain, Ecopoetry of California. She has also edited No Place for a Puritan, The Literature of California's Deserts, and she is a professor of English at the College of the Desert, as well as being a former wildland firefighter for the Bureau of Land Management, the California Desert District, and for the United States Forest Service. Welcome. It's a pleasure to have you with us.
Hello. Thank you.
You have picked some of the wonderful poems in this excellent anthology that talks about the various ecosystems of California and presents them in a poetic manner. How did you decide which poets to use and which poems to share?
Along with my co-editor, I really wanted poems that spoke directly from the voice and soul of California. I'm a native Californian, second generation. Grew up in originally San Bernardino in Southern California and then the Mojave Desert. But I've also traveled extensively during my lifetime throughout our beautiful state. Lots of backpacking, firefighting, camping, road trips. And I have a deep understanding of the fact that California is comprised of so many different diverse geologies and ecosystems. And so I wanted poems that really spoke to this, that spoke to the unique energies and spaces in our state, but also poems that perhaps also spoke to some of our unifying experiences here, such as the impacts of urbanization, the impacts of wildfire and climate change, the impacts of how you can so easily be in an urban space here in California and then suddenly find yourself contemplating a unique wilderness and nature type of experience. I wanted poems that were beautiful, but also perhaps spoke to some sense of wonderment and what is our history, what is our culture, what's important about our spaces and places, and what's important about our human interactions and relationships to these. States.
It's not too common to hear about women firefighters. How did you get involved with that? And we know how critical it is here in California to tackle the fires because climate change has really increased the volume and the intensity of fires.
I fell into firefighting. I was a teenager, 19 years old, and living in the Mojave Desert, which was then even more of a remote experience than it is now. We had no internet. If you didn't have a car, I didn't. At that age, you basically were kind of stuck out in the desert. Not a lot of jobs, not much to do except get out and hike and explore. And one day I was walking down a road and I saw a sign asking for firefighters. So that's how I fell into it. Instantly really thought it was an exciting thing to do. Working first on the Mojave Green fire crew based out of the San Bernardino Forest. And then I went on to jobs with the Bureau of Land Management California Desert District based out of Apple Valley, California.
Since the book was published, you've written a new poem. Could you share that with us?
Sure. Teaching my daughter to put out fire. It isn't your typical scenario. A young mother who worked 7 years ago as a wildland firefighter, driving a Jeep in four-wheel drive up 3 and 14, the back road to Big Bear, from the desert with her daughter, 5 years old, to reach the Rattlesnake fire burn zone, the last fire she ever fought. This is another July day. The mother wants to see for herself how the mangled landscape looks today, what remains of the Joshua and pinyon trees, what bird sounds filter now through the barren air, what reference points to negotiate by. Without the Jeffrey pines or live oak, without the juniper, she worked on this fire. She watched most of it burn away. Today, huge boulders scatter revealed, ominous ghost wails rising from heavy smoke. In her mind's eye, she wants to reassess, look for signs of life. Now that so much has been taken away, one careless toss of a cigarette, one careless finger on a trigger, a father locked away. Some things have been destroyed forever. Some things have been saved. Some things new and strange grow in this space. Will there be birds today? Ravens, perhaps a few western jay. Will there be mountain wildflowers suckling on the blackened dirt? Perhaps a few deer negotiating their way across a moonscape on their way to a small spring. Jackrabbits hopping in and out of the slowly dying and regenerating Joshua trees. Before they reach the lonely place, the mother and daughter stop at an empty campground. So the daughter can run and play, and the little girl spots it first, a wisp of smoke tickled by the light wind and rising. A careless camper, a campfire not put out. The mother reaches for her army shovel and hands her daughter a bottle of water and says, "We have work to do. This is how you put out a fire before it has a chance to start. Look for the small things, a wisp of smoke, a gleam of orange eye, a seduction of tiny flame. This is where it starts, and this is where it will stop. Nothing more will burn here today."
It's so important that people know how to deal with fire, when to put out fires, how to put out fires, how to protect their places from fire. And it's also important that we let some fires burn in natural areas because some species depend on fire.
Absolutely. And lately, a lot of my academic work has based on this topic I've developed of learning to live and have relationships with wildfire for those of us here in California. Instead of the old idea of trying to put all the fires out immediately and hoping they don't happen, we have come, I believe, this year to understand that we absolutely have to learn to live with fire, and we have to learn how to build sustainable relationships with wildfire, because that is historically a big part of our ecologies here in much of the state.
In the book Fire and Rain, Ecopoetry of California, one of your other poems called Mopping Up is about firefighting. Can you share that?
Absolutely. So one of the things in my own writing that I'm really fascinated with is the idea in firefighting of how many of the terminologies of the work is domestic, believe it or not. So mopping up is one of those terms that applies to a certain job that you do on the fire line. Mopping up. It's the most unraveled and well-paying job I've had. Fighting fires in far-flung fiery wilderness areas, in the San Bernardino Mountains in the south of the state to the Panamint Mountains near Death Valley, the Sierra near Yosemite, the San Gabriel's looming above LA, the Marble Mountains wilderness. Most of the time, I was the only girl on the crew, cutting fire line and sucking down smoke. And after a fire had laid down across ravaged meadows and once forested slopes, our job would be far from done. We'd hike in baked potato hot, ankle-deep ash that blew eerily in the wind. shed snakeskins, and we finished off dying wildfires by stirring and cooling the molten detritus with our sharp shovels. To finish the job, we'd spray dribbles of water from the fat bag that sloshed like heavy vertigo on our backs. We struggled to keep pace in the slowed-down underbelly of burned-up things, in cherished if little-known Golden State geographies with lonely names: Rattlesnake Mountain, Horsethief Spring, Last Chance Range, Toro Peak, and above us the whispered remains of familiar forest trees, lurking black and tall and jagged, stripped of the dignity of their given names: Jeffrey Pine, Ponderosa, Western Sequoia, California Black Oak. At our feet, the complete bequeathing of the latter fuels: Manzanita, Western Juniper, Coyote Brush, Poison Oak. We could never be sure the fire would be completely out, so we stirred our ash and sifted through what had been scorched and watched each unearthed ember spark hot and red, then wish into its puffy last breath. And this, a job well done, is what I remember most vividly from my firefighting days. The mopping up, making sure the fire was put to bed, soothing the feverish brow of forsaken landscapes to cool them down. That, and how often the guys on the crew would ask me why I'd left behind the apron of my domesticity to flirt with flame instead of with them.
I'm certainly very pleased that there are people willing to put their lives at risk to put out the fires. It's really important that we have skilled individuals to do the job that's necessary. But we have so many more fires because of climate change, because of the drought. And that is something that we have to rather learn to live with at this point, don't we?
Well, yes, that's part of it. You know, a big influence, and this also does tie in with climate change, the fact that humans and people have been having a big impact on our natural world for so long and in such an increasing way. This summer's fires in particular were also, unfortunately, happening during the pandemic, which sidelined quite a few of the inmate fire crews that typically do a majority of the wildland firefighting in California.
Could you share Stephen Meadows' poem, Drought, where he's talking about living in the mountains in drought situations?
Yes. One thing I really like about Stephen's poem and why I wanted to include it in our anthology is that he gives a very good depiction of the emotional quality for Californians, what it's like to live in these wilderness-urban interface areas where we know that things are getting more and more dry and that the potential for fire is becoming increasing. Stephen Meadows, Drought. Hot breath on lupin, on sizzling sierra, parched grass, the seed pods tick soft in slow wind. On the skittle this summer, madronas are bright, yellow ponderosa, brown needles, low water sucks the stone.
There are so many different themes that have been shared in these poems. One of them that I think is so important is that we enjoy nature, not just in the wild, which I love doing, going into parks and wilderness areas and natural areas and ecosystems that don't have buildings, but yet there's nature just outside of our window, in our homes, in our cities. There's wildlife here in the city, and we can see nature, whether or not it's the birds or the insects or the coyotes that have come down off the hills. You have a poem by Mary Makovsky called Dear Editor.
Yes. Mary's poem is a wonderful example of being a Californian, or it could be anybody anywhere, looking out at nature from the relative safety of being inside your home, but also coming to understand by what your observations around you in the natural world, that in addition to beauty and elegance, there's also always something that shows us how powerful nature is and how fragile perhaps our relationships to nature are, and they are also kind of frightening in some ways, but most of all this sense that we absolutely must focus on our relationships to the natural world. Dear Editor by Mary Makovsky. The light tracks me all day, sitting at my desk, late afternoon now. Air holds its breath, barely a tremble in the fountain grass. The box elder leaning across the glass. A small plane droning low over the hills. Does it seem leisurely? Does all seem well? Today I compose more and more fervent letters to the editors of every local paper. Why it must change. Why we must think who we are as the same that is never the same, turned over leaves that flamed or quietly browned. What dies, what thrives in the garden every year is different, unpredictable. Our share's enough. We can't change the weather. We used to say, though now we know better, too late moves us faster than the fast retreating glaciers. We keep thinking we'll advance forever.
You and your co-editor, Lucille Lange, have put together a wonderful collection in this book, Fire and Rain, Ecopoetry of California. Thank you so very much for compiling these beautiful poems. Thank you for being my guest.
Oh, you're absolutely welcome, and it's really a pleasure to speak to you today and have the chance to read some of the poems from our book.
I have been speaking with Ruth Nolan, who's an author, lecturer, editor, and professor of English at the College of the Desert. I'm Nancy Perlman. Thank you very much for joining us, and do tune in again next week.
If you would like free information about these environmental issues, go to www.ecoprojects.org or call 310-559-9160. Environmental Directions with your host, Nancy Perlman, is a community affairs program of the nonprofit organization Educational Communications and this station.